Gervonta Davis will face 8th-division legend Manny Pacquiao in a blockbuster generational clash. But hidden weight clause could strip one fighter of their biggest weapon before the opening bell. Stay with me to see who it hurts and why it could decide the fight. So, here's where things stand. Gervonta Davis, Manny Pacquiao, two names that, when you put them next to each other, make boxing fans stop scrolling. Start with the man pushing hardest for it, Pacquiao himself. Manny Pacquiao, a living legend and the only world champion in 8 divisions, has set his sights on Gervonta Davis. But he's not just saying, let's fight. He's setting terms. Pacquiao has challenged Davis with one key demand: to fight at 145 or 147 pounds. That's not a small ask. That's asking Tank to leave the weight classes where he's terrorized opponents for over a decade. His team has been saying this out loud on the record for months. Sean Gibbons, Pacquiao's longtime advisor and the COO of Manny Pacquiao Promotions, has been a mouthpiece for this whole pursuit. Gibbons has laid out exactly why this matchup makes sense on paper, pointing out the styles, the recognition, the money. He's called Davis a fighter who pushes the buttons and said the two of them match up very well physically, both being the same height with identical reach. He even called it the dream matchup because for once in a long time, Pacquiao would actually be the bigger man in the ring. Now, flip to the Davis side of the room. His camp hasn't shut the door. Far from it. Trainer Calvin Ford, the man who's been in Tank's corner since Davis was basically a kid, has talked about a return to the ring being on the horizon, saying he will be back in the mix, and that Tank has been doing this since he was 7 years old. That's not a man distancing his fighter from big fights. That's a trainer setting the stage for one. And then there's Robert Garcia, trainer to some of the sport's biggest names, who's weighed in from the outside, calling this a huge fight and putting his own opinion on who wins it. When trainers who aren't even involved in a fight start publicly picking winners, that tells you something about how real the conversation has become in boxing circles. So, you've got 3 separate camps: Pacquiao's team, Davis's team, and respected voices from elsewhere in the sport, all talking about this matchup like it's not a matter of if, but when and at what weight. Boxing could be facing one of the most talked about fights in recent years. Here's the thing that makes it even juicier. The request poses a huge challenge for Davis, who has built his career in lower weight classes, shining at 130 and 135 pounds with fearsome knockout power. Pacquiao isn't offering a courtesy catch weight. He's asking the naturally smaller lightweight champion to step into territory where Pacquiao, despite his own age, has spent his last several fights as a full-fledged welterweight. And Davis's response? He hasn't laughed it off. According to reports out of his camp, Tank has been floated the idea and hasn't rejected it outright. In fact, going back to when Pacquiao first started teasing his comeback, a tilt with Tank was floated ever since Pacquiao started teasing his comeback in 2023, with Pacquiao even suggesting a 145 pounds catch weight to lure in the WBA lightweight champion. That's not a fresh idea somebody cooked up this year. This has been simmering for years, with both sides circling each other, both sides publicly interested, and neither side willing to be the one who blinks first on the terms. Gibbons has been candid about just how close they've come before. He's admitted they were close at one time to fighting Davis, that they were talking, but couldn't come to an agreement on a couple of things, and the timing didn't work out. That's about as direct as a fight maker gets when he's telling you a deal almost happened and the timing keeps almost lining up. Gibbons laid out the blueprint plainly. If Pacquiao got past his opponent and Davis got past his, that's the fight. He put it simply: once Manny holds that welterweight strap, it will be a great 47th birthday present to make the fight. A fight built around a birthday, around history, around two punchers who, by his own account, the fans would be really intrigued to see. Oh, that's where we are. A legend with a very specific ask. A knockout artist whose camp hasn't said no. Advisors on record calling it a dream matchup. Trainers publicly picking sides. And a history of negotiations that have gotten close enough to touch before. The question now isn't whether people want this fight. Clearly they do. The question is what it actually took to get here. And that story starts with the man who came out of retirement chasing one more piece of history to understand why Pacquiao is even in this conversation. You have to go back to why he laced the gloves back up in the first place. Manny Pacquiao ended his 4-year hiatus from the ring, taking on Mario Barrios for the WBC welterweight title in what was his first appearance since a 2021 defeat to Denis Hugas. For years away, a loss as his last memory in the ring. Most fighters at that stage just stay retired. Pacquiao didn't. There were questions about Pacquiao's decision to come back at the age of 46. Understandable questions. Boxing isn't kind to fighters in their 40s, let alone their late 40s. But Pacquiao has never really operated by the normal rules of the sport. A world champion in 8 divisions, from flyweight to super welterweight. Pacquiao was enshrined in the International Boxing Hall of Fame. 8 divisions. Nobody else in the sport's history has done that. When a fighter with that resume decides he's got one more run in him, people pay attention. The Barrios fight itself didn't go the way the comeback story usually goes in the movies. Pacquiao fell just short of regaining a title at the age of 46, with Mario Barrios retaining the WBC welterweight championship after a majority draw. No robbery narrative, no clean disaster, just a draw. Competitive, good enough to prove he still belonged in the ring with a reigning world title holder, but not good enough to complete the fairy tale. And that draw actually became the launching pad for everything that followed. Instead of walking away with a "well, at least I tried" story, Pacquiao walked away from that ring more convinced than ever that he wasn't done. In the lead-up to that fight, Pacquiao showed interest in a matchup with Davis, but said Tank must agree to a catch weight of 145 pounds at a minimum. So even before the Barrios result was in, the Davis fight was already the target on the other side of it. That what's driving all this? At an age when most fighters are coaching their kids instead of training themselves. History. Actual measurable history. At 47 years old, he's chasing history by trying to break his own record as the oldest welterweight champion. He already holds that record. He's trying to extend it against himself, which is a strange kind of motivation, but it's real, and it's driven every decision his team has made since the Barrios draw. That single-mindedness explains why the Davis pursuit never actually died, even when other big names enter the picture, because right alongside the record chasing, there was always the ghost of Floyd Mayweather hanging over Pacquiao's comeback. Pacquiao has waited more than a decade for a Mayweather rematch, and while it's been close to happening, that fight won't happen until 2027 at the earliest. A decade of waiting for a sequel that keeps sliding further away. For a while, that Mayweather rematch actually looked live. Pacquiao himself told reporters there were active discussions, saying there's a lot of ongoing negotiations right now, and that he was simply waiting on the final word to lock a date. It looked for a stretch like Davis might get pushed to the back burner while Manny chased the bigger nostalgia payday instead. Except that rematch has now run into exactly the kind of turbulence that keeps derailing every big fight in boxing conversation these days. Legal trouble. A series of legal battles involving Mayweather derailed the fight, as he's been sued over breach of contract for his upcoming fights and allegedly took substantial advance payments before abandoning the deal. With that mess unresolved, it's unlikely that Mayweather will be able to compete this year as he looks to resolve his outstanding legal troubles to the Mayweather door, which had cracked open, slammed shut again, and every time it slams shut, Davis's name comes right back to the top of Pacquiao's list. Gibbons has more or less confirmed it, even with Mayweather dangling out there. The moment those talks stall, Davis becomes Plan A again. Not Plan B. There's also a quieter piece of this puzzle that matters. Pacquiao isn't just fighting anymore. He's building. Pac-Man launched his fight promotion in the United States. Originally established in 2006 as MP Promotions and now rebranded as Manny Pacquiao Promotions ahead of a move into the US market. A legend building his own promotional company while still active as a fighter is rare. It tells you he's thinking about his legacy on 2 fronts at once. What he does in the ring and what he leaves behind outside of it. A blockbuster fight with the biggest knockout artist in the sport would be the perfect launch vehicle for both. And he stayed busy while the big-name fights kept stalling. Rather than sit around waiting on Mayweather's legal situation to resolve, or Davis's situation to clear up. Pacquiao took an exhibition against Russian veteran Ruslan Provodnikov, a fight built more around nostalgia and spectacle than world rankings, just to stay sharp and stay in the public eye. It's the move of a fighter who has zero intention of fading quietly into retirement while the sport decides who he gets to fight next. That's Pacquiao's half of the equation. A legend with nothing left to prove statistically. Chasing a record only he can break. Dangling a Mayweather rematch that keeps collapsing under its own legal weight. And circling back again and again to the one man his team keeps naming as the dream opponent, Gervonta Davis. Which brings us to the other side of this, because if Pacquiao is the constant, Davis has been anything but predictable. That if Pacquiao's story is about chasing one more page in the history books. Davis's story is about a fighter who has spent the better part of 2 years proving he can dominate everyone except his own circumstances. Start with the resume, because it's the reason Pacquiao's team keeps circling back to him. Tank Davis is one of the most vicious knockout artists and entertaining fighters in boxing, boasting a professional record of 30 wins and 1 loss with 28 knockouts. 30 wins, 28 of them by knockout. That percentage is the reason this fight has real appeal beyond nostalgia. It's not 2 old names cashing a check. It's a legend against a finisher. But the one in that record, the draw, is where things start to get complicated. And it's the fight that's defined his recent career more than any of the 28 knockouts. His last fight came against Lamont Roach, ending in a draw. Not a loss, not a win. A draw that a huge portion of the boxing world felt should have gone the other way. Many people think Roach beat Tank when they battled to a majority draw. And although Roach didn't walk away with Davis's title, the Reaper put on a performance that made him a main event-worthy star. That result did something interesting. It didn't just cost Davis a clean win on paper. It cost him the aura of invincibility that had defined his career up to that point. As one fight maker close to the situation put it, Gervonta got exposed a little bit and had a bad night against Roach, and the shine is off a little bit. That's a brutal thing to hear about a fighter who was, up until that night, considered nearly untouchable. And here's where the story shifts away from the ring entirely. Because since that draw, Davis hasn't actually fought again. Not once. The reason isn't a lack of opponents lining up. It's everything happening outside the ropes. First came the derailed exhibition. Winless since his last real fight, Davis's only action since has been the draw against Roach, with legal issues continuing to get in the way of his return. There was a planned crossover fight against Jake Paul, a bout that would have kept him active and kept his name in headlines even without a world title on the line. That fell apart. A proposed fight with Jake Paul was scheduled, but was canceled after Davis was accused by his ex-girlfriend of aggravated battery and false imprisonment. That was just the beginning. Things escalated. Davis was arrested in South Florida on charges of battery, false imprisonment, and attempted kidnapping tied to an alleged incident. Serious charges. Serious enough that the sport's own governing bodies had to respond. The WBA stripped him of his lightweight title and moved him to champion in recess status. Think about what that means for a champion. He's not stripped in the normal sense, beaten in the ring, dethroned by another fighter. He's in limbo, recognized as the best in his weight class technically, but sidelined by his own governing body because of what's happening in his personal life, not his professional one. And it hasn't cleared up quickly. Davis is wanted by Maryland authorities for allegedly violating his probation following his arrest, with a court order on the books. And although his lawyers filed to have it revoked, their request was denied, meaning the order likely remains in effect. An active warrant, not a rumor, not a fan theory. An actual entry in a county court database that hangs over every single conversation about his return. Davis is wanted by law enforcement in Maryland after allegedly violating his probation when he was arrested on allegations of domestic violence. Every promoter, every network, every opponent's team has to factor that reality into any deal they try to put together. You can't build a pay-per-view around a fighter who might not legally be able to show up. And yet, this is the part that keeps the Pacquiao conversation alive rather than dead. Davis keeps talking like a man who fully expects to fight again. And soon out he's been floated multiple opponents just in the WBA's own ordered pecking order. He's been stripped of his WBA lightweight title and named champion in recess, but reports suggested he'd compete again at some stage. And if he did return, he'd been ordered to face the WBA's #1 contender, Floyd Schofield. He didn't take that fight either. He's angling for a return, albeit after rejecting an opportunity to reclaim his WBA lightweight title against Schofield. A mandated title fight, and Tank passed on it. That's not the move of a fighter desperate for any bout. That's a fighter and a team holding out for something bigger. Something like a legend with 8 world titles to his name, that he's also made headlines by calling out names that have nothing to do with his own weight class at all. It was reported that the Baltimore-born operator would not fight this year, instead declaring his return would take place in early 2027. But Davis next called for a bizarre clash with newly crowned WBA bantamweight title holder Jesse "Bam" Rodriguez, who messaged back simply, "All right, let's do it." A bantamweight, a fighter who competes some 17 pounds below him. If Davis is willing to publicly call out a man that much smaller just to stay in headlines, it tells you something about his appetite for spectacle over convention. The exact same appetite that makes a jump to welterweight against Pacquiao at least plausible in his own mind, but there's also been talk of a rematch closer to home. Reports indicated Davis was in advanced talks to fight a rematch against Isaac Pitbull Cruz at 140 rather than 135, with an insider saying he expected it to happen, and many believing Cruz gave the Baltimore man one of his toughest tests as a professional. Moving up to 140, that rematch would actually be a meaningful data point for the Pacquiao camp. Proof that Tank is at least open to leaving his comfort zone in weight.so. Here's Davis's half of the story. A fighter with knockout power that makes him one of the most feared names in the sport. A draw that cracked his aura of invincibility. A legal cloud that has kept him out of the ring for what's approaching 2 years. And running underneath all of it, a pattern of turning down smaller opportunities while keeping the door open for the biggest 1.2 fighters. 2 very different reasons for being available for a super fight. One chasing a record, one trying to outrun his own legal situation long enough to cash in on his name. And somewhere between those 2 stories is where the Pacquiao fight actually lives, that if the appetite is there on both sides, why hasn't this fight actually happened yet? The answer isn't a lack of interest. It's a pileup of obstacles that keep landing at exactly the wrong moment. Start with the weight issue, because it's the single biggest technical hurdle in the entire negotiation. Pacquiao's side has been consistent and unmovable on this from the beginning. The Filipino is not willing to accept the fight under any conditions other than at a higher weight than the American dominates. And Davis's team knows exactly what that's asking. Pacquiao has fought exclusively as a welterweight since 2009, while Davis has fought only once above the lightweight limit in recent years, a stoppage win against Barrios. That one data point, a single fight at a higher weight years ago, is basically the entire case for why Davis could even physically do this. It's thin evidence for a super fight built around Pacquiao's insistence on 145 or 147. Then there's the calendar problem, which has been just as damaging as the weight debate. Every single time Pacquiao's team clears space for a Davis fight, Davis's side ends up occupied elsewhere, usually by something outside the ring entirely. And every time Davis's side quiets down enough to talk fight dates, Pacquiao ends up chasing Mayweather instead. Look at how many times this calendar has shifted. At one stage, sources close to the situation had this pegged for around Pacquiao's birthday, framed almost as a gift to himself. Then that window passed. Then talk shifted to Pacquiao facing WBA title holder Rolando Romero instead as a backup plan in case Davis wasn't ready. If Davis rejects the offer, the Filipino was already considering an alternative plan, facing Rolando Romero, the current WBA champion, which could also guarantee spectacle and media attention. That Romero fight almost happened, too. And it tells you a lot about how fragile all of these super fight plans really are in this era of boxing. It initially appeared Romero's next fight would be against Pacquiao, following the Filipino superstar's controversial draw against Barrios, with Pacquiao's longtime advisor telling reporters last October that a fight with Romero was likely to take place in early 2026. Likely not locked. And sure enough, the fight didn't materialize, and Pacquiao pressed for a rematch with Mayweather instead, with rumblings of a rematch with Barrios also shuddered at SO. The pattern here is almost comedic if it weren't so frustrating for fans. Every path forward for Pacquiao keeps getting abandoned in favor of a shinier option, and every shinier option keeps collapsing under its own weight. Meanwhile, on Davis's side, the calendar keeps getting eaten up by legal proceedings rather than opponents. Every time a fight gets floated, Schofield, Cruz, Haney, something outside the ring intervenes before ink hits. Take the Haney situation, which at one point looked like the most realistic version of Davis actually stepping up in weight. It appeared that the new frontrunner to face Tank was WBO welterweight champion Devin Haney, after the pair were reportedly in talks, with Haney becoming WBO welterweight champion with a win over Brian Norman Jr., and a clash against Davis, potentially seeing Tank compete at 147 pounds for the first time after previous world title reigns from super featherweight to super lightweight. That's the exact template the Pacquiao camp needs to see. Proof that Davis would actually go up to 147. And for a while, it looked live. Then just like everything else in this saga, it stalled. Devin Haney is now looking to fight either Shakur Stevenson or Keyshawn Davis this fall after being told by Al Heyman that Gervonta Davis won't be available to fight until early 2027. That's the number that keeps surfacing from multiple corners of the sport now. And it's become something close to a consensus among the people closest to Davis's situation. It's looking more and more likely that he'll be back in early 2027. Even other champions circling him for a fight have started to accept that timeline. A WBO welterweight title fight against Devin Haney was rumored, but that fell by the wayside after Devin's father and trainer announced that Davis won't be ready to return until the first quarter of 2027. That's a full calendar year or close to it of Davis simply not being available for anyone. Not Schofield, not Haney, not Cruz, and by extension, not Pacquiao either. There's a legal thread underneath all of this that's easy to lose track of amid the fight talk, so it's worth being direct about it. The latest updates from the Baltimore County Court database show an active arrest warrant for Davis, and if apprehended, he will be held without bail. That's not a footnote. That's the single biggest variable in whether any version of this fight against Pacquiao or anyone else can actually get built, marketed, and put on a poster. And even setting the legal cloud aside entirely, boxing's business side has its own competing priorities eating up the calendar. Networks and promoters have other cards to fill. Premier Boxing Champions has headed toward the summer with the intention of crowning a 3-division champion and presenting a slate of compelling fight cards, bringing former 3-belt welterweight champion Errol Spence Jr. back from a near 3-year hiatus. Every big date on the calendar that isn't reserved for Davis or Pacquiao is a date that pushes their eventual meeting further down the road. Pacquiao, for his part, hasn't been sitting idle waiting on Tank to sort out his situation. His exhibition against Provodnikov gave him activity, relevance, and a reason to stay sharp. Proof to any future opponent, Davis included, that he's still training like a man, expecting a Real fight, not a farewell toward SO. Put it all together, a weight demand that requires Davis to abandon the division he's dominated, a rotating cast of alternate opponents on both sides eating up calendar space, a legal situation that's kept Davis out of any ring for close to 2 years and now has people around the sport openly bracing for an early 2027 return at the earliest, and a business calendar stacked with other marquee cards competing for the same pay-per-view weekends. None of that has killed the idea. If anything, the constant chatter, the constant near misses, the constant public interest from both camps, that's exactly why this conversation refuses to die, no matter how many times the pieces fail to lock into place. Which brings us to where things actually stand today. So after all of that, the weight demands, the legal battles, the collapsed alternate fights, the calendar chess. What does the picture actually look like heading into the back half of this year? Pacquiao is still doing exactly what he's done since the Barrios draw, staying busy, staying visible, and keeping the door open. His exhibition against Provodnikov gave him a reason to stay sharp without committing to a full training camp against a live opponent. Although it wasn't an official bout, the clash carried significant interest due to their legacies, with the Filipino star widely regarded as one of the greatest boxers of all time, returning after a career highlighted by world titles in 8 different weight divisions. That's the mode Pacquiao's team has settled into. Stay active, stay in front of fans, keep the record chase alive, and let the Davis situation resolve itself on its own timeline rather than forcing a bad deal. Gibbons has made clear repeatedly that a title opportunity is still the ultimate goal, and that Pacquiao's camp will consider whatever presents itself, as long as it keeps him moving toward that history book record on Davis's side. The picture is murkier, but not dead. He's talked about wanting a best versus best kind of fight to close out his career. The kind of framing that only makes sense if you're thinking about legacy fights, not tune-ups. One rival champion has even publicly predicted he'll be the one to send Tank into retirement, saying he plans on fighting me as his last fight on his way out the door. Whether or not that particular matchup happens, it tells you Davis himself is talking in exactly the language of a fighter thinking about a final defining opponent. The exact language that's kept the Pacquiao rumor circulating for years. But the hard reality, repeated now by multiple people close to the situation, is that Tank's calendar is essentially frozen until the legal side of his life gets resolved. He's been told he won't be available to fight until early 2027. That's not a promoter being coy about a date. That's the timeline his own inner circle is now planning around. And that timeline actually lines up, oddly enough, with the other super fight that's been dangling over Pacquiao this entire time. The Mayweather rematch, which Pacquiao has waited over a decade for, isn't expected to happen until 2027 at the earliest either. So